regard for privacy. I think everybody here understands that they were very private individuals and a very private family.
Gene Hackman was a man who built his career on playing some of the most intense and compelling characters that have ever been seen on screen. He was one of the most respected and elusive figures in Hollywood. Nevertheless, a man who kept secrets that no one could have imagined, was hiding behind the legendary performances, behind the fame, and behind the accolades. During the investigation into his death, which was both shocking and mysterious, the investigators who were searching his home in New Mexico came across something that they had not anticipated finding: his personal diary. It appeared as though Hackman had never intended for it to be discovered, as it was dispersed in a remote location, tucked away amongst old books and forgotten memorabilia. After they had cracked it open, however, they were shocked by what they found, which sent chills down their spines. The journal appeared to be a collection of reflections, memories, and thoughts, written by a man who had lived an extraordinary life. At first glance, the journal appeared to be nothing special, but as they turned the pages, they noticed a change in the situation. There was a darker tone, a haphazard manner of writing emerged. An individual who was plagued by paranoia, fear, and cryptic messages regarding his past was revealed through the entries. There were passages that gave the impression that he was being watched, that he was aware of something that the international community was not prepared for, and, perhaps most unsettling of all, that he feared his own death. What could Gene Hackman, a man who had been absent from the public eye for a considerable amount of time, have been concealing? And what was the reason that he was so certain that his life was in jeopardy? One thing is becoming abundantly clear as the details of this diary begin to emerge. His final years were plagued by something that was significantly more sinister than anyone had ever known. The submissions are unsettling, the implications are shocking, and the most important question that still needs to be answered is, would it be more accurate to say that Hackman's death was a natural occurrence, or was there something much more sinister at play? A moment of quiet remembrance should have been reserved for the passing of Gene Hackman, who was one of the most talented actors in Hollywood. A man who had chosen to live a quiet life in Santa Fe, New Mexico, away from the chaos of the industry that had made him a legend, and who had stepped away from the spotlight many years ago. However, when the news of his passing became public, the circumstances that surrounded it prompted a great deal more questions than they did answers. Initially, it was reported that natural causes were the cause. In the comfort of his own home, an elderly man passed away peacefully. However, as soon as the investigators arrived at the scene, they immediately became aware that something was not quite right. Hackman was not discovered in his bedroom or any other setting that provided him with comfort. Rather, he was discovered in his private study, seated at his desk, as if he had been writing something prior to the sudden termination of his life. However, even more unsettling was the discovery of his wife, Betsy Arakawa, who had also been found dead in another part of the house. Are there two people who passed away on the same night, in the same house? These odds were extremely unlikely to occur. After that, the peculiar particulars started to become apparent. In spite of the fact that there were no indications of having been forced into the house, the first responders noticed that the door to the house was slightly ajar. Several of Hackman's cherished dogs were still inside, unharmed. However, one of them was discovered dead for reasons that remain unknown. Later on, toxicology reports would reveal that the dog did not exhibit any symptoms of illness, was not poisoned, and did not have a discernible cause of death. The creature had simply ceased to breathe, similar to how Hackman and his wife behaved. The findings of the autopsy were inconclusive. No signs of a heart attack were present, despite the fact that Hackman's heart had stopped beating. No illegal substances, and no criminal activity. It's nothing at all. All the same happened with Betsy. Two people who were in good health disappeared without a trace. Despite this, the authorities moved quickly to complete the investigation. Those who were closest to Hackman, however, were aware that something was not fitting. During the weeks leading up to his passing, he had appeared to be acting in an odd manner. Some people asserted that he had become more and more paranoid, distancing himself from the public eye even further than he normally would have. There were certain phone calls that he refused to answer. He stopped seeing old friends, and he even gave a close confidant a hint that he was preparing for something. In what manner was he getting ready? For what reason did he appear to be aware that his time was running out? The most frightening piece of evidence was found in his personal study, which was a private space. An open journal, which was his personal diary, was found sitting on the desk right next to his lifeless body. In the beginning, the investigators thought that it was nothing more than a collection of memories from his past. However, as soon as they started reading through it, they quickly realized that this was very different from a typical journal. The contents of the box would forever alter everything.
Is sending electricity to pace the heart, okay? It's also taking snapshots of what the rhythm is in the heart.
When the personal diary belonging to Gene Hackman was discovered by the investigators, they did not give it much thought at first. Why would a man who is in his 90s keep a journal? There is nothing out of the ordinary. The assumption was that it contained a collection of sentimental recollections, personal notes, and possibly some unfinished thoughts regarding his professional life. But as soon as they began reading, it became abundantly clear that this was not a typical diary or journal. In the first few entries, they found exactly what they had anticipated: brief musings about life in Santa Fe, mentions of his wife, and even brief reflections on his days spent in Hollywood. However, as they proceeded through the pages, the spirit of the conversation began to shift. The handwriting, which had been consistent and accurate in the past, became more erratic. The entries were no longer merely recollections. Rather, they were cautionary tales. One of the first entries that was particularly unsettling was dated just a few weeks before he passed away. "I notice that something is off. Somewhere where there should be no shadows, I see shadows. I answer the phone, but no one is there to speak to me when it rings. They are not yet ready. Looking over." The man, who had always been known for his rational and level-headed nature, made a statement that was quite peculiar. Why was he making such a statement? Who was keeping an eye on him? And what was the reason that he thought he was in danger? After reading more, the investigators found that their paranoia only grew stronger. Hackman described in his writing the presence of strange noises in the middle of the night, cars that he did not recognize parked in front of his house, and a persistent feeling that someone was attempting to silence him. "I made an effort to convey the message to them. My attempt was to warn them, but they do not want me to make a statement. Because of the passage of an excessive amount of time, they now want me to vanish without a trace." This was a chilling set of words. Who exactly were they? What exactly was it that Hackman was trying to protect people from? He referred to certain moments during his time in Hollywood as events that should have never happened. There were cryptic references to his employment in Hollywood. In his remarks, he mentioned conversations that he was not supposed to listen in on, secrets that were concealed, and names that were never meant to be spoken out loud. There was one passage that stood out among the others. "They believe that I forgot. They believe I have moved on from it. However, I do recall. The events that took place in 1983 are still fresh in my mind. I am able to recall who was present. I'm able to recall what they did. And now they are aware that I remember." It was a year that mattered nothing to the investigators, but it was obvious that Hackman was concerned with everything. Could it have been a reference to a film? A controversy in Hollywood? Is it something much more sinister? Following that, there was the most unsettling entrance of all of them. Hackman wrote something that sent shivers down the spines of those who read it just a few days before he passed away. He wrote, "If something happens to me, look inside the..." It seemed as though he had been interrupted as the sentence came to an abrupt halt. There was going to be no continuity. There is no explanation, just a warning that was only partially written, but it would haunt those who discovered it. In an effort to discover whatever it was that Hackman had intended to disclose, the investigators diligently searched the entire house from top to bottom. In addition to checking under the floorboards, they also looked inside drawers and behind furniture. And yet, they discovered nothing. In a sense, it appeared as though whatever it was that Hackman was about to reveal had disappeared along with him. There were more questions than answers that were raised by the diary. This painted a picture of a man who, in his final days, believed that he was in danger, a man who knew something that he was not supposed to know. And now that Hackman has passed away, it is possible that the truth has been buried along with him.
Gene Hackman was found dead at his home in Santa Fe. Yeah, I love Gene Hackman.
He was an amazing actor.
Gene Hackman was nominated for 5 Oscars, won twice, one for his role as Popeye Doyle in The French Connection.
In the course of the investigators' continued reading through Gene Hackman's diary, one thing became abundantly clear. He was terrified. He was not afraid of old age or illness. Rather, he was afraid of something or someone that he believed was going to come after him. In his final months, the entries described a growing sense of paranoia that he was experiencing. In his writing, he described how he had witnessed strangers parking their vehicles in front of his home and how he had watched them wait for several hours before finally driving away. Calls made over the phone with no one on the other end, It was just far enough away that he couldn't make out the faces of the strange figures that were standing there. When I am being watched, I am aware of it. I am perceiving it. During my years in Hollywood, I became aware of when people were looking at me. However, this is not the same. This is a deliberate action. His statements were not the ramblings of an elderly man who was at a loss for words. Rather, they were precise, deliberate, and filled with fear. Additionally, Hackman made numerous references to them. He continued by saying, "They have been covering it up for years. They are under the impression that I have forgotten, but I have not. I will never forget to do so. Now, however, they are seeing to it that I do not utter a single word." Who exactly were they? Was he referring to the power brokers of Hollywood? Officials from the government? Who is it from his prior life? An entry that was particularly unsettling suggested that Hackman was under the impression that his time was running out. "I am running out of time. Now they are getting closer. They believe that I will leave without a fuss." On the other hand, if something were to happen to me, people should be aware that it was not my choice. On the other hand, he passed away a few days later. Could it have been that Hackman was losing his grip on reality? Or could it have been that he had discovered something that someone wanted to put away for good? Regardless of the answer, his fears were very real to him, and it's possible that they were the reason he didn't live long enough to experience the full story.
Being on a set with Gene Hackman.
Well, Gene, people ask all the time, who's the best actor, who's the biggest star, who's the blah, blah, blah. The line's long for the great actors I've been able to work with, really is. But I would say probably Gene was the best actor.
The investigators continued to flip through Gene Hackman's diary, and as they did so, they came across entries that sent a shiver down their spines. In the midst of the paranoia, the fear, and the cryptic warnings, there were confessions, which were hints of secrets that had been buried for decades. A particular passage that stood out to me was the following: "I've done things that I can't erase. I've been a part of things that I definitely should not have been a witness to. I made myself believe that it was just Hollywood, that it was the way things worked. Nevertheless, I can now see it for what it actually was, a device that consumes people and then spits them out after it did so. Moreover, I did not speak up. Where did Hackman get his information from? Is there a scandal, an offense? Alternatively, something even more ominous. Despite the fact that it was written in shaky handwriting, another entry appeared to be more of a desperate attempt to come clean. There are given names, identifiable names that people are familiar with. They continue to exist in the world where they continue to live as if they are untouchable. However, they are not. I should have made my voice heard. During the time that I had the opportunity, I ought to have been honest. No names, however, were written down. It is unknown whether Hackman intended to reveal them at a later time or whether he refused to put them in writing because he was too afraid. After that, there was the most unsettling passage of all, which was a message that was left unfinished. "If something happens to me, look inside The sentence came to an abrupt halt. There is no subsequent entry. There is no second page. It was almost as if he had been put on hold, possibly just a few moments before he was about to write what he really wanted to say. With a burning desire to discover what it was that Hackman might have been referring to, investigators searched every nook and cranny of his residence. In a safe? Is there a secret compartment? Could it be that he has a file buried deep within his study? It was a complete failure. In a sense, it appeared as though whatever it was that Hackman was about to disclose had been removed, either by him or by another individual. And now, with his passing still shrouded in secrecy, it is possible that the world will never know what he was trying to convey to the world. The case took an even more peculiar turn when the Federal Bureau of Investigation became involved, as word spread about the disturbing diary entries written by Gene Hackman. The local authorities initially refused to acknowledge that Hackman's death was due to natural causes. The tone of the investigation changed, however, when the investigators obtained his diary. The number of questions that remained unanswered, the number of cryptic warnings, and the amount of paranoia were all too much to ignore. A shocking event then took place, which was the arrival of federal agents at Hackman's estate. It was reported by neighbors that they saw black SUVs that were not marked pull up to the property. Agents went into the house, remained there for a considerable amount of time, and then left with boxes of personal belongings. What exactly were they trying to find? The question was whether or not Hackman had left behind any additional secret documents. Has he been concealing evidence of something that was more significant than himself? Is there a possibility that his death prompted an investigation into something that the general public was not supposed to know? It was declined by the FBI to comment. In addition, they did not issue any official explanations or public statements. On the other hand, the mere fact that they were involved in any way only served to fuel the continuing speculation. Meanwhile, the response from the general public was explosive. There was an explosion of speculation on various social media platforms as soon as the news of Hackman's diary was reported in the media. If there is involvement from the FBI, you can be sure that a significant matter is being concealed. There was something that Hackman knew, and he did not pass away naturally. Take my words for it. The question is, how many Hollywood elites are currently in a state of panic, wondering what is contained in those diary entries? There were headlines in the media that read things like, "What did Gene Hackman know?" An inside look at the journal that the Federal Bureau of Investigation is interested in. A Hollywood legend's final words and why they're so disturbing. Gene Hackman's death, coincidence or cover-up? But Hollywood itself remained eerily silent throughout the entire event. Actors who had previously collaborated with Hackman declined to comment on the matter. Industry insiders who have been around for a long time and are typically quick to share tributes had nothing to say. It seemed as though no one wanted to acknowledge the fact that such a discovery had just been made. But why is that? What sort of message was Gene Hackman trying to convey to the world? A more important question is, who was it that wanted to make sure he never had the opportunity? Gene Hackman's life was intended to be remembered for his legendary performances, his quiet retirement, and his refusal to play the Hollywood game. His life was meant to be forever remembered. On the other hand, his legacy is currently being overshadowed by a chilling mystery, which may never be understood in its entirety. His unsettling entries in his diary, his unexplained fears of being watched, and the unfinished message that hinted at a hidden truth are all indicators that point to something that is significantly more significant than a straightforward case of sudden death. On the other hand, nobody is speaking. Adding more mystery to the situation is the involvement of the FBI. What was the reason behind the sudden interest shown by federal agents in the personal belongings of a retired actor? What could they possibly have discovered that would have warranted holding such a secret? And perhaps most importantly, what was removed? The entertainment industry has remained silent in spite of the public outcry and the media frenzy. Friends, co-stars, and industry elites who had previously worked alongside Hackman have declined to comment on the matter after being asked about it. There has not been a single prominent figure who has come forward to comment on his passing. It's almost as if they already know the truth, but they can't confess it because they're not allowed to. Is it possible that we will ever learn what Gene Hackman was trying to tell us? Is it possible that whatever he found has been buried for all time, just like he himself? There is one thing that can be said with absolute certainty. Those who read his final words, his paranoia, and the secrets he leaves behind will be haunted for many years to come. And as the pages of his diary continue to be stored away in some unidentified government archive, a terrifying question continues to linger. In order to prevent Gene Hackman from revealing something that the world was never intended to know, was he eventually silenced?